Alrighty, welcome back to the Defying Gravity podcast with Zach Goodman. I know it's been a few weeks since I did my last podcast. It's been a kind of a crazy few weeks, just wrapping up with the school year and all that stuff. We had our combine. We've been doing some things outside of strength and conditioning. I've had some different different business things going on for like my own training and things like that with my side stuff. So it's been a busy couple weeks. But I am back, and so I'm going to knock out a few episodes. I'm actually kind of on a whim here. It is currently Saturday night at 11 p.m. Sorry, and it's actually relatively late for me. I go to bed pretty early because I like to get up relatively early. But I had some passion strike, and something that I've learned with these podcasts has been passion strikes. Capitalize on it because that's usually when you're going to have your best work, going to have your best thoughts. Okay. So, despite me being tired, this is more of a passion episode, right? Got a spark to do this one, so I wanted to sit down and knock it out. Probably record a few of them tonight, so I have some additional things to post. Since I kind of got the itch. So a question I've had this question. I've been on some different podcasts, right? And so when you go on podcasts, there's always like that ending couple questions, and the ending couple questions I always ask is like, any place I can find you, what books do you recommend reading? I've had some messages on Instagram over the last year or two, like, what books do you read? How do you learn this stuff? I don't know. For some reason, people are interested to hear what I read. So I was asked to make a podcast, I think maybe last week by somebody off Twitter saying, "Hey, man, you should either make a post or make a podcast for what books you like to read for information. Where are you getting your information from? Where do you like to find these answers and things like that?" So I sat down and I put down about 20 books that I've read in the last like maybe year or so, maybe 2 years. A couple of them I haven't read like within the last year, but these are at least the ones that are off the top of my head. I have 20 of them. I read a lot. I listen to books on Audible. I read a lot. So I have so many like snippets and things that I share on social media. Like I just like reading. When I read stuff, I like to highlight it. And so I go through a lot of different books. Traditionally people they get bored and they go watch TV or whatever. I like to read stuff. So when I have downtime, I like to go read strength conditioning books. I don't, It's just something I like to do. So I've read a lot of books. Okay, so bear with me on this one tonight. So books that I've read, I have a list for you here. Okay, we're gonna go through each of them. First one, Book of Methods. Okay, probably the most obvious one on my list. If you listen to this podcast, you know I'm a big conjugate guy. Big Louis Simmons guy. I've been listening to Louis on his podcasts, on the YouTube snippets, clinics that get posted on there. I've been reading his stuff, reading the blog articles. Um, Shit for a long time. Like it's probably since high school, early high school. As soon as I found Westside Barbell and really started to read about the stuff. So I own Book of Methods. I own them a couple manuals. I own like the bench manual, the squat and deadlift manual. They're basically all just like snippets essentially from the Book of Methods. So like I always just tell people go get the Book of Methods. That's kind of like your one stop shop for that, right? So Book of Methods, Louis Simmons. That's kind of where you're gonna get the background of the conjugate method. He makes it honestly it's if you read the blog articles, you're pretty much getting the Book of Methods because blog articles, a lot of the older blog articles are literally just like posted and put into the Book of Methods. Because I read both, so I'm like, oh, that's the same thing I read from the Book of Methods. So the Book of Methods kind of just a compilation of all the stuff that he's basically wrote about over the last 3 or 4 decades or whatever plus. So Book of Methods is my first recommendation to people that are trying to learn about the conjugate method. And it's not even the most in depth, I guess, book or manual like on this, the science, the history, things like that. It's probably one of the best for application. So if you're looking for like understanding how to apply this conjugate method, kind of getting it in more simple terms, obviously learning from the most influential strength coach in all of the history of strength coach, Louis Simmons. Book of Methods is an easy choice. Okay. And probably the one that most people would associate that I would have on here. Okay, moving on from that. Signs and practice of strength training from Zatsiorsky. A lot of the things and snippets I post on social media, a good amount of those have came from Zatsiorsky and his science practice of strength training textbook. So this was kind of the book that confirmed. I don't know if I've talked about this before on the podcast. I know I've told people this, but um, you know, getting a lot of strength information from powerlifting side. You hear a lot of things about Westside Barbell, right? One of the biggest knocks was like, specificity. That was the biggest one is there's not enough, there's too much variation, not enough specificity, not enough, specific strength work, stuff like that. Things that apparently are the opposite in the actual athletic world, but powerlifters have their own kind of notions of Westside Barbell in the book of methods, and kind of the mess that came out of Westside Barbell from Louis Simmons. Science practice strength training is kind of the reference point for that. So it's kind of the reference point for me, to where I was able to reference back a lot of what Louis was saying and kind of confirm, like, is this true? Are the notions out there, are they fair? And so when I first read Zasiorski's Science and Practice Strength Training, it goes through all the different methods of training, goes through really everything you need to know as far as strength training goes, and gives you the science, the background. Obviously, it's grown from Zasiorski, which is kind of a legend in research and coaching. But aside from that, science practice strength training probably the best manual in my opinion as far as strength training goes. It's more dumbed down than super training, but it is by far the most digestible textbook that I've read that's given me a ton of answers on things. And it's one that I still go back to this day. And I have a lot of, like, again, highlights and screenshots, things like that of the book, because it's one that I've read, quite a bit. I think I read this for the first time. Like, I actually sat down and, like, went through it during COVID. So I don't know, 3 years ago, 4 years ago was the first time I really sat down and, like, went through. I had the time to go through, but usually what I did when I first got it was I would just go through different chapters. Like, I'm like, okay, here's the topic I need to figure out. Okay, let me go here and read about it. And so this is kind of what gave me a good understanding about how these methods work and kind of where these notions of like powerlifting and things kind of go wrong, especially on the specificity part. Like, understanding that specificity is bigger than just an exercise. It's bigger than just a pressure gradient. It's also velocity specific. Something that a lot of powerlifters miss, is that they say, oh, you need to bench this amount of times. You got to have specific movement patterns, this and that. But a lot of their training focuses between that 75 and 85%, which is non-specific in terms of velocity. So that was a big, like, key takeaway from that book. There's a lot of stuff in there, but that was like one of the biggest things. That was one of the biggest mindset shifts for me was, oh, West Ham actually is specific for strength sports because it's velocity specific. I didn't really understand that until I kind of read that book, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's how that works. It also talks about overload and things like that, like the two ways to overload, quantitative, qualitative, all the good stuff. It's all in there. Okay. Third, super training. Okay. Contrast and the different reactive methods are on there. Group maximal tensions are along with the other methods of maximal muscular tension. Okay, all that stuff is in there. Again, another one-stop shop. A lot of the stuff from science practice strength training is also in super training. I know there's been some people that have said like SIF has ripped off other authors and things like that, but super training again is comprehensive. It's not as digestible as science practice strength training, but again, I don't want to go too far into that because there's other books I need to get to that I don't think anybody really talks about for some reason. Everybody kind of knows about super training, but I think there's a lot of stuff that people are not reading that I think is important. My fourth book on here is Build a Better Athlete by Michael Yessis. Okay, um, he's a researcher and and a well-known person in the strength community world. He created that 1x20 program that, frankly, I don't like a lot. I'll probably make a podcast in that, but he wrote a book about building better athletes. I think it's called Build. To look at it, Build a Better Athlete. But one of the biggest takeaways that I got from him specifically was training below the knee. He has a lot of exercises and things like that, specifically around the ankle and foot, along with this other good strength information regarding speed development. But Michael Yessis, let me look it up. What is this called? Build a Better Athlete. What's wrong with American sports and how to fix it? Okay, I read this just last year. Actually, no, it's been 2 years ago. I read this 2 years ago. Kind of right around the time 1x20 really started to pick up some more steam. Never really heard about 1x20, and then so I picked up that book, read that book. A lot of this stuff in there is all good information. Yeah, again, I think the only thing goes wrong with the 1x20 program is a couple things wrong with it that I think are important, but that book is good. I did like that one. Again, it's a lot of the same information. Actually, a lot of the Yes's stuff is really kind of in line with Bompa's stuff, which I'll talk about in a bit. But did like that one. That was my number 4 book. Fifth one, this is one I just got done reading. Brad Schoenfeld, Science of Muscular Hypertrophy, I believe it's called. I just read this one like literally, so I started it maybe last month, 2 months ago, and I've just kind of like worked through the sections at least that I wanted to go through. I'm pretty much almost done with it. I also read Triphasic, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I just got done with Triphasic, which is interesting, but there's some pitfalls in that stuff, which maybe I'll make an episode about that too. But Brian Schoenfeld, Science of Hypertrophy. Okay, I have some thoughts on hypertrophy because my second, or my next one is on DC Train by Dante Trudell. I think a lot of the hypertrophy stuff in there that he talks about is a couple different things that I took away from that one. Doublets or double discharges from motor units or from motor neurons. Okay, that was important to me because I didn't. I knew I always kind of understood that you can pull, you can create greater discharges in greater motor unit recruitment and greater discharges quicker with lower rep sets. But I didn't understand necessarily because there's so much like weird information about like potentiation, post activation potentiation. I never really knew where that stemmed from, right? Like we have all these ideas like, oh, you got to prime the nervous system. What does prime the nervous system really mean from like a recruitment level? All that means is that we're getting motor units, motor neurons to discharge twice in a rapid sequence. So not only are they discharging once, they're discharging twice, which is known as doublet discharge. Okay. I didn't really understand that concept until I read this. Thought it was really interesting. Some of Schoenfeld's stuff is kind of contradictory in there though. And so he'll read that and it'll be like, one of the biggest things with metabolite accumulation. That's like a big thing right now. Chris Beardsley talk about metabolites. It's basically the fatigue that kind of accumulates from the nervous system during force production. So what you want to do is essentially is to produce maximum output, for hypertrophy purposes, push, weights to failure, push the muscles to muscular failure, or until they can no longer, recruit motor units to complete the task, to task failure. And so that's where you're going to create the greatest amount of discharge and the greatest amount of motor unit recruitment to, again, kind of recruit fatigue fibers, create new, greater, stronger fibers. And so how this Brad Schoenfeld stuff kind of is contradictory is that he talks about metabolite accumulation, and then he then kind of contradicts himself as far as like rep sets and things like that go. There's a portion of the book I need to find it. I highlighted it. I can't find it for some reason. But I know I have it because I remember reading it and putting it on a sticky note and then going back and highlighting that. But he talks about them because he has research that's listed in there, kind of supporting some of the things he's saying. He talks about lower rep sets creating less metabolite accumulation while still also creating more motor neuron discharges, okay, more motor unit recruitment. He also talks about how metabolite accumulation is it kind of hampers that effect of force production, which we already know. Okay, metabolite accumulation is just fatigue. Okay, so what we want when we want to get strong, we rest a long time to diminish some of that fatigue that we just had, so that in the subsequent set we can now produce more force. Which hopefully, again, if we're getting enough rest, maybe we can produce enough force to complete another rep or two. Over time, those reps add up, and then you can actually get more strength development quicker. Okay, so it's the reason that we harp on big long rest periods on my stuff and other coaches' stuff. Um, but he goes on talks about like the 6 to 12 rep range, is kind of what a lot of his material is biased towards. When in like literally contradictory, it talks about how research has shown that between the I think it was 4 to upwards of 8 tends to be 8 tends to be the highest threshold you can really get to before metabolite accumulation becomes super dominant as far as like the force production goes in a set. Where we know is like another reference material between 1 to 6 reps, ends up being the greatest amount of force production with the least or minimum amount of metabolite accumulation. Okay. A guest I'm going to have on relatively soon is known for the low rep sets, the high sets. Not going to spoil that, but if you know my stuff and you're on Twitter, you probably know who I'm talking about. He's going to come on. We're going to talk about some of this stuff. But yeah, there's a little bit of contradictory information on there, but overall, liked a lot of his stuff on there. I still have some more things to share regarding like some different things they found as far as exercise selection goes, which I do like. I'm really something that's super intriguing to me is like the stability of movements and how that kind of creates more motor unit recruitment and more tension on specific fibers. So I am really interested in that kind of stuff and kind of how to apply that, to more of my athletes. I've talked about this kind of principle or understanding before, but this book gave me a better understanding of that. Um, Next one, something that nobody ever talks about, and I hate it. That nobody talks about this book, or no one kind of gives him the kind of some credit. Is Purposely Primitive by Marty Gallagher. Okay. A guy that is predominantly known for powerlifting, trained Kurt Kowarski and some of the other old school powerlifters. Eddie Cohen, okay, he basically was like, from what I understand, kind of not the godfather of linear periodization, but really was the one that created this linear periodization kind of cycle, American cycle type training, right? This, tens, eights, fives, threes, type of, wave cycling, basically linear periodization. He wrote an entire book. He wrote an entire book about um, all the different training methods and things that he's learned over the years. And so there was a specific lifter in there. I can't recall because I read this book maybe 2 or 3 years ago, but something that's stuck in my mind for a super long time is that there was a lifter he talked about. I actually need to go back and read this book because I really did like it. Um, there was a lifter that he wrote about in there that was a world champion during, I think, the 70s. And the only training he did was he just used singles. He only did singles. I forgot the name of him. He at least is relatively famous in like the old school powerlifting world, but he only did singles all the time, all year round, never really did reps, only did singles. And so I wanted to go back because I thought that was a really interesting way of training. And I thought there's got to be something there. Like it must have been the amount of sets. He must have been accumulating work somewhere. But this whole like top set methodology too, I really do like it. I don't think it's necessarily like, optimal, but I do think that there's some real validation for, obviously working up to those max rep sets, which is what brief maximal tension is to me. And so I really liked a lot of the stuff I was reading in there. And then just how simple the training was. It was nothing that was too crazy. It was very simple and straightforward. So again, it's refreshing. Like when you read scientific texts and you are going through, like, you're deep diving, going on the rabbit holes and so many different things. Sometimes you just need to take a step back and read something really, really simple and really straightforward and just come to the, conclusion of how simple training really can be. So Marty Gallagher, I read a lot of his stuff, like, again, 3 or 4 years ago, maybe longer. I don't even know. It's longer than that. But I read a lot of his stuff. I do like a lot of the stuff he talks about. Again, some of the stuff is wrong, but um, kind of goes to show how simple a lot of training can be. Next one, Dog Crap or DC Training Forums. Okay. Dante Trudel, for those of you who do not know who that is, he's kind of a legend in the bodybuilding space. He's underground. It's to me, he is someone that, here's the thing when you get into strength. Okay. When you start getting to talk about strength or really just performance in general, the best type of training is always from the underground. Okay. And this is something that I've learned. This is something that I've really figured out. The people who are doing it the best are not always the most known about, right? The people that maybe don't share enough information, they don't necessarily share all their stuff. Okay, maybe they don't even want to share it. Dante Trudel is someone that, started writing about his own training methodologies on forums and things, kind of when the internet kind of really started popularizing bodybuilding, things like that. He kept his identity relatively private for a while, and talked about this DC training, on how he kind of designed a high intensity bodybuilding split to build, basically to pack on strength using rest pause sets. And so with the idea of creating more strength to create more muscle mass using rest pause sets, so it was a little bit more efficient, but using top set training. Again, I liked a lot of his stuff, because really it comes down to this: are we building stronger? Are we building stronger? Are we getting stronger? And something that kind of bridged the gap for me, I guess, from performance to hypertrophy and muscle mass is it really all comes down to, and this is like big picture thinking here, but bear with me on this. When it comes to getting stronger, it comes to getting faster, it comes to getting bigger, right? We're all just manipulating the nervous system in some way to create and recruit more fibers, to experience more tension, to create newer and stronger connection between. Okay. And so it kind of started to bridge the gap for me where I'm like, if you really good strength, people know this, but really good strength training ends up being really good hypertrophy training, right? Things that make you stronger make you bigger. Things that make you stronger make you faster, right? The only difference between the bigger to the faster is that bridge of strength between. Okay. And if you're trying to get faster, you need it to be a little bit lower reps because you need that discharge to happen a little bit faster. Trying to get a little bigger, you don't necessarily need to get that faster, but it's definitely not going to hurt. Okay, so kind of what I've learned from, like, I've experienced some rest pause sets. Okay, what rest pause sets kind of are, they're kind of like a cluster in a way where you're pushing, maximum reps, take a little bit of rest, then push again for maximal reps. And so really like a cluster of 15 reps ends up being like, I don't know, a set of seven, a set of three, or a set of five, and a set of whatever to finish off. So it kind of goes to show, at least to me, kind of bridge that gap between strength and hypertrophy and how it's kind of all interconnected in one way or another. So I like a lot of that stuff. Again, I do like a lot of the underground type of training methodology. I found that to be some of the most helpful information out there. 8, vertical diet with staying efforting as far as nutrition goes. This is what I would recommend to anybody. Number 9, periodization methodology and theory by Bompa. Another one that I share a ton about, because Bompa is the godfather of um, the godfather of periodization. Okay, he was the guy that kind of applied a lot of these principles and methods and things like that into some sort of periodization scheme that was more easy to understand and to apply. He has a lot of really good information on strength training. One of my biggest takeaways for me is his focus on development of power, because he trained a lot of throwers and Olympic, medal athletes. Okay, and how strength is accounting for it. Specifically, he says absolute strength accounts for about 95% of one athlete's maximum power. Okay, and that other 5% is going to be velocity. So in order to make an athlete a lot more powerful, absolute strength is going to basically create the greatest effect. It's going to account for, he says, 95% of an athlete's power is their absolute strength level, with only about 5% of that being the actual rate of force found, the actual velocity. Again, I don't know if those percentages are perfectly accurate, but the point of it is that absolute strength will always be the foundation of all power development, because you can only produce something fast if you can produce it maximally. And so simply, if you give an athlete access to more force, they're going to be able to produce more force at the same percentage they were producing before. So if an athlete can only produce 65% of their absolute strength at a specific velocity, like let's say 1 meter per second or something like that, right? If we give them access to more force, now they can produce more newtons. And so now they can produce more newtons at the same percentage, even if we don't sharpen the rate of force development. So something I also thought was really interesting, and someone that, again, helped me kind of make sense of how this power development, because power development we all chase, right? But the reason that, the way that we can all create power is through absolute strength. Next one, 10, some of Wenning's manuals. Specifically, I like a lot of the Wenning warm-up stuff. I don't use it with my athletes, but I do use it with my athletes, I guess you can say. I do use some of the things with my kids, and some of them I don't. But I do like specifically his powerlifting manual. That was relatively good. It was the first manual I've ever bought from him and read from him. Probably his best one he's ever made. It was like one of the original ones he first made. Now it feels like sometimes some of the stuff is getting pumped out too quick. But such is business and such is money. But that was probably one of my favorite ones. That was probably the best one he's ever wrote. Jared Bidney's jump book. Okay, I have it somewhere around here. Just it's sitting on my table, so I can't even find it. But it's somewhere in here. Okay. Bidney's jump book gave me the keys to the jump training. Right. Michael Fahey gave me the initial information I needed. Bidney filled in all the gaps of things I didn't necessarily understand the whys behind. Now having a full circle picture of like what it looks like from Bidney, what it looks like from Fahey, what it looks like from Bird, and then what it looks like for me. Okay, really helped me. So Jared's jump book, again, love Jared. Great dude, was a great podcast guest. Was my first podcast guest, a guy that I've went to for a lot of training information, a guy that I've stolen a lot from, and a guy that has continued to help me out. Um, weekly I talk to him, relatively free. Anything that I've ever needed from him, he's always helped me out, and he's always given me good advice on things like that. So definitely go pick up his jump book. Next thing, Barry Ross, Underground Secrets of Training, Speed Training. So Barry Ross specifically, mass specific force, okay, relative strength. Again, tying kind of together the importance of building a stronger athlete that can produce more force, leveraging the second law of motion, okay, leveraging physics to create more dominant, powerful athlete, okay. Next one, triphasic, one I just read from Cal Dietz. Okay. I know all the rage the last few years has been triphasic training. I'm going to say this very nicely. I don't know why in the heck anybody would use triphasic training for any sort of athlete after reading his book. A lot of the stuff, phew, contradictory. Again, I think he has a lot of good information in there, but there is some stuff that is not correct on there. It doesn't really line up with exactly what the research and what's actually being said in other books. But again, it's an interesting way to train. It definitely does not. It makes training less boring, I guess you can say. He has some good ideas. He's definitely a smart guy. He has some great ideas, but some of the stuff he's off about, especially when it comes to contraction types and some of the stuff he's talked about, like tension of fibers and things like that. Some of that stuff is not right. But he does have some good information on some other things. Obviously, he has access to force plates, which basically, if you have access to force plates, you can pretty much say whatever you want. Um, it tends to seem like people that have force plates seem to fabricate some of the things they see. But I just read Triphasic. It definitely is an interesting way to set up training. I think it's definitely has some utility to it, but again, at the end of the day, it's just conjugate training. Um, it's just conjugate training, except for your, differentiating different contraction types and things like that. But again, has good information. A lot of the stuff is repeat information that we all know. Definitely a bright guy, but again, I don't know why you would ever use this for a an athlete. But in general, why would you ever use this for a high school athlete? I have no freaking clue why people do that. Makes no sense to not take advantage of the actual trainability and the adaptation rates they can actually get. Um, I can see some utility again at the college level or elite, Olympic level maybe, but end of the day, why are you robbing high school kids of contraction types and why are we not just concurrently training all these? Why are we putting emphasis on specific abilities? Why are we trying to have specific focus blocks on different things? Like that makes no anybody that's in the trenches that actually trains kids understands it's not going to shape up like that. So again, it has utility, but a book that I would recommend people read so they understand, because this is like a big thing right now. This triphasic type of omni contraction training. There's a bunch of different kind of like words you want to to your system. It's all the same stuff. It's all dressed up conjugate, but again, something that I do suggest people read so they have a better understanding of what's actually happening around like strength conditioning field right now. It's kind of trendy. Um, so yeah, definitely I would recommend reading it, despite me like not agreeing with some of the stuff in there, but I did learn some things. I did take some things away from that. I talked about simplicity before with purposely primitive. Another one that's simplistic and something that a lot of strength coaches will really kind of tie to and stick with is Wendler's 5-3-1. I've read his 5-3-1 and beyond, I believe, or maybe it's 5-3-1 for I think it's 5-3-1 forever. I've read that. I've listened to a bunch of his podcasts. I still listen to some of his YouTube channel stuff. I've read almost all of his articles on his blog. Wendler has a simplistic way of viewing training that again when you get into the weeds too much on some of the training information, sometimes you need to take a step back and view things in a very simplistic way, and it can kind of help you like kind of make bridges, I guess, as far as information goes. So it is very, in my opinion, it's very essential to take a step back sometimes from some of the research and literature and then just look at what is the most simple and most basic thing somebody is doing that's working, and then how does this all make sense. Okay, so it's kind of like that quote, like, you know, um, I don't look to science to teach me about training. I look to science to prove what I already know about training. That's kind of Wendler to me. Is like what Wendler does works. The simplicity, the principles of the training work. Why does it work? Reference the science, right? But sometimes it's good just to look at a very basic and simple thing and realize what's the minimal amount of stuff I can do and get away with and get progress off of. So like that, going along with simplicity, practical programming for Ripito. I read this when I was young. It was one of the, I think it was the first strength book I ever really read full way through. I think I was, I don't know, 13 or 14 or something like that. I was young. It was the first real book. That and then Wendler. I read both those things when I was young, and I just kind of recently revisited some Wendler stuff. I like some of his 5-3-1 stuff for accessories. Okay. So I messed around with some of the 5-3-1 stuff for accessories, but I'm pretty much sold on the brief maximal tension. I'm never getting away from that. His main lift stuff is too conservative. It's not recruiting optimal discharge frequency. It's not recruiting enough motor units. It's not enough straining. Again, why are we in the weight room to build strong, not to get more proficient in lifts? I think that's where the 5-2-1 kind of falls short. But it's a great insurance policy, especially for coaches who are very conservative in the weight room. It's a great insurance policy. If your kids follow it right, they're never going to really grind. They're never really going to strain. They're going to get stronger over time, but are they getting stronger or are they getting more efficient in a lift? I don't know. Let the 40-yard dash or the jumps tell you. But I know what I see. But I do like his stuff. He's got a good way of training, a good idea of training. Definitely a bright guy, and definitely a guy that makes maybe complicated things simple. Um, Essential. So I want to talk about some different books that I read for like personal development that's kind of helped me the coaching side of things. Because aside from all the training, knowledge and things that I like to read about, coaching is definitely something that I don't think you can ever really figure out enough of. At the end of the day, we're just communicating all this information to athletes, and hopefully we're smart enough to understand what actually needs to get communicated and what things we don't really need to communicate with them, but are just going to happen organically. Um, and so a book that I read that I kind of got into last summer was Essentialism. Okay, it's known as Essentialism. Basically, the key kind of consensus of this book is how can we take away from other parts of our life and go big on the things that really matter? How can we do less but then get more out of the things that we really do invest our time in? Change some of the ways that I've maybe navigated some things in my life, but also change the way that I viewed training and figured out what's the most essential things we need to do to get better, and how can I make the training how can I give them the most essential, most important things. Okay. And so essentialism kind of helped me with that. Some of the principles and things in that book have really helped. Next book on kind of that personal development track that I've read is Stillness is the Key by Ryan Holiday. Again, from a personal development standpoint, in order to be an effective coach, you have to be an effective person, right? You have to be someone that is living the code, someone that is consistent and that's stable and that is living a sustainable lifestyle. Like the things they don't tell you about coaching is that you have to actually have your crap together, right? In order to manage tons of different athletes, in order to be successful in anything in life, you have to have your outside life together. Stillness is the key is one, especially as a strength coach that sees a lot of athletes every day, and maybe um, in this kind of area, sometimes it can get overwhelming managing so many kids at once. As far as like, what weights they need, what do they need this, what do they need this? Oh, this kid needs to learn this. There's a lot going on, right? And so that was just another personal development book that I read. Just kind of giving me the tools that maybe I need just to slow down a bit and just be a more effective person, but a more effective coach, figuring out when I need to take a step back and when I need to push, figuring out how do I stay composed in times of stress? How do I not let stress affect coaching? How do I not let stress affect other areas of my life? Again, personal development stuff I think is just important. 19, Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, one I just listened to the last month, 2 months ago, maybe. I like to listen to things when I lift. I like to listen to not strength conditioning books, but personal development books. And then when I actually want to study stuff, I actually sit down and read the stuff. But like personal development books, I can just listen to those. Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. Um, Again, it has a little bit of like a religious undertone and things like that to it. But aside from all that, just the idea that we're eliminating hurry from our life, we're eliminating things that maybe don't matter, kind of going along with other books I've read, but just doing the essentials and doing the things that really matter to us, going big on those things. Another book I really like. And then last thing, the last book I had on here, Dan John Stuff. What I have on here, Dan John Stuff. Another simplistic guy, another guy that the push, pull, hinge, carry, lunge, that guy. Dan John has a lot of good stuff as far as just like simplicity goes. Again, teaches you how simple it can all be. Um, Again, I don't use necessarily a lot of stuff from his training, but I do like listening to him talk about training in a very simplistic view. Because again, when you go down these rabbit holes of information, it's so easy to become over analytical, to overanalyze everything, to overcomplicate simple things. And so it's so important to have that lever you can pull, that you can go back to that simplicity, and it helps you bridge that gap of understanding. And so because I read the really intensive type of material like the super training, the science practice strength training, and I read some of these more intensive type of readings, it helps me so much to go back and listen to someone that's super simple, right? Because I can really bridge that gap of understanding. So Dan John, a lot of his stuff very simple, straightforward. Again, I don't use full body. I don't use push, pull, carry, hinge, long. I don't, necessarily use his framework for training, but I just like listening to him talk about simplistic things in training. And I do like some of his minimalist type of strength stuff. I've really gone down this rabbit hole of how little can we do to get strong? What's the minimal effective dosage, per se? So I really do like a lot of his stuff as far as that goes. Okay. There's probably things that I'm missing. I read a lot, so like there's things I'm missing. This is just the book list I came off the top of my head. Oh, also should mention not a book list, but it's something I read all the time. Is Chris Beardley. He has a blog. He also has a Patreon, but he also had a podcast. I like all those things. Chris Beardley has a lot of great information. He's kind of, to me, one of the people that right now has some of the best information analysis on strength training, hypertrophy training. Definitely go listen to him and definitely go look at some of the things that he's pulling as far as reference. Like I've seen him pull so much good information and use it for his own content. But then I go back and read like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But he has a really good way of explaining effective rep model. Okay, this theory of effective reps. Effective reps is something like this theory of effective reps is so tied closely to strength. Everyone thinks about it as hypertrophy. It's like, no, this is what you need for strength too. This is why brief maximal tension works better than max effort. And so this kind of enough stimulating reps to create tension in the fibers. Okay. Again, a lot of good stuff. Help me bridge the gap between strength training, hypertrophy training, but ultimately just a really smart guy and has a lot of good material out there right now. But that's gonna wrap up. I don't want this episode to go too long. How long we've went for, but there's a list of books that you can read, list of information. I'm always finding new stuff to read. I just like reading. I'm like dude that's just interested in weird stuff like strength and conditioning. So I invest a lot of time in that. But hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully I gave you some answers and some ideas on things that you can read yourself. Maybe I share with you a book or a piece of information you haven't heard of before, which would be cool. Go pick it up. Okay. But that's all I have for you. Thank you for listening. I'm going to go bust out another episode. So hopefully you hear that one next. See ya.